The 50s were a period of many firsts. The world was still recovering from the horrors of the Second World War, and the effect could be sensed in Hollywood as well. This was the time when many directors were experimenting with horror movies, giving them a tone and style that felt fresh. Several of the famous Universal monsters saw their birth during this very decade and went on to become beacons of English-language horror cinema. Although this was 7.5 decades ago, many of the horror films from the 50s hold enough creative value that makes them rewatchable, and in this video, we're going to explore exactly that. So without extending this intro any longer, let's jump right in. The Blob, 1958. The Blob is a crazy piece of 1950s horror that introduced audiences to a hungry, ever-growing alien goo. The story follows teenager Steve Andrews, played by a young Steve McQueen, who stumbles on a gelatinous creature that lands in a meteorite and starts gulping down any poor soul who crosses its path. Each person it devours makes it bigger and nastier, turning this small-town invasion into a nightmare with the capacity to become a worldwide apocalypse. Steve eventually figures out that cold temperatures can freeze the blob, so the locals manage to stop its rampage by blasting it with fire extinguishers. They don't kill it though. They fly the frozen mass to the Arctic, hoping the cold will keep it dormant forever. A plot point that feels eerily ahead of its time, given modern worries about melting ice caps. Originally pushed as part of a double feature, The Blob scored a surprise hit with moviegoers, even if critics shrugged at its campy B-movie feel. That success led to a 1972 sequel called Beware the Blob, which leaned into comedy, and a 1988 remake by Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont that cranked up the scares. Now there's talk of another reboot, this time with David Bruckner, the guy behind the Hellraiser remake, attached to direct. However, he's just the latest in a long list of potential filmmakers, so no one's holding their breath until cameras actually start filming. John Carpenter's The Thing might be the most famous adaptation of John W. Campbell's story, Who Goes There? But it owes a big debt to the Blob's premise: a gooey alien from space that crash lands on Earth and grows stronger by feasting on victims. The 1958 film's influence didn't stop with its own remakes. It paved the way for other sci-fi horrors like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which also attacks small towns, and left its mark on countless creature features. Some fans even point to a real incident from 1950 in Philadelphia, where cops found a pulsing purple jelly after seeing something fall from the sky, as the possible inspiration. All in all, The Blob is a weird, influential gem that proves sometimes the simplest ideas can spawn a legend. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a freaky sci-fi classic that still scares people decades later. Directed by Don Siegel, it tracks an alien takeover by pod people, soulless duplicates that replace real humans in a small California town. Despite a low budget and a rushed shoot, the movie soared above typical B-movie fare to become one of the most celebrated science fiction tales ever made. And that's the reason why it's received multiple remakes over the years. At first glance, it's a straight-up alien invasion flick, but beneath the surface, folks have read it as a commentary on everything from Cold War paranoia to the fear of creeping communism or even McCarthy-era witch hunts. Regardless of how you interpret it, the movie captures 1950s anxieties like few others, and shares a spot with The Thing from Another World, Them, and The Incredible Shrinking Man as part of a trend of paranoid sci-fi. It has a stark noir-like style, dark alleys, shadowy faces, and minimal special effects that gives the story a gritty realism. That grim tone even puts it in the same league as Robert Aldrich's Kiss Me Deadly. Screenwriter Daniel Manwaring brought major noir cred, as he had previously written Out of the Past and collaborated on The Big Steal, which helped kick off Siegel's directing career. In Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the focus on humanity's cracks and flaws appears through the terrifying idea of losing one's identity to alien pods. Siegel's refusal to soften his message makes the film what it is today, proof that sometimes the biggest scares come from the simplest of feelings, like watching everything familiar slip away. Them, 1954. Them is one of the earliest giant bug movies worth remembering, and for good reason. Gordon Douglas directs this 1954 classic with enough tension and nuclear angst to keep you glued. The story revolves around State Police Sergeant Ben Peterson, who uncovers some seriously odd disappearances in the New Mexico desert. Turns out, radiation from nuclear tests at White Sands has turned ordinary ants into massive people-eating monsters. As the ants start branching out, Dr. Harold Medford and his daughter, Dr. Pat Medford, join Peterson in a race against time to stop these creepy crawlies from forming new colonies. The showdown ramps up in the sewers of Los Angeles, where a queen ant threatens to spawn a swarm that could wreck humanity. Even though the ants are mechanical puppets, Douglas makes them surprisingly convincing with crafty camera work, quick glimpses, clever lighting, and a distinct clicking sound that signals their arrival. That unnerving noise alone is enough to raise goosebumps. The special effects hold up, especially compared to later giant insect flicks like The Black Scorpion or the cringier Beginning of the End. Where those films went wrong, Them triumphs by bringing together suspense, action, and a hefty dose of Cold War paranoia. These mutant ants basically stand in for the terrifying possibilities of nuclear power and how one mistake can unleash disaster. Beyond the killer ants, the movie delivers a nuanced take on authority. Sure, the government and military are heroic, but they also keep the public in the dark about the ants' existence to avoid panic. It's a decision that makes sense, yet has its moral downsides, like locking up a perfectly sane man in a mental ward to maintain secrecy. For a 1950s sci-fi flick, Them strikes a balance between must-see spectacle and deeper themes about the nuclear age and the fragility of society. It's no wonder it's considered a peak in giant monster cinema. The Thing from Another World, 1951. When legendary Hollywood director Howard Hawks stepped into sci-fi with The Thing from Another World, it was a big pivot from his usual flair for quick-fire dialogue in noir, westerns, and screwball comedies. Released in 1951 and shot in moody black and white, this B-movie gem took John W. Campbell's novella, Who Goes There, and set it in an isolated Arctic research station. Though some shape-shifting elements from the original story got trimmed due to the era's technical constraints, the film still captures the dread of a hostile alien crash landing on Earth. Its success influenced a whole wave of 1950s horror flicks and left a big impression on a young John Carpenter, who later created his own spin with 1982's The Thing. Carpenter's version isn't just a standard remake. It directly talks back to Hawks's movie by using similar imagery while cranking the horror up several notches. In the 82 film, Carpenter even calls out the original's discovery scene, showing it through footage shot by a doomed Norwegian team. This clever nod shows the relationship between the two, and makes Carpenter's The Thing more of a sequel than a do-over. While Hawks's movie ends on a hopeful note with the alien defeated, Carpenter flips the script by having the first team wiped out and the new group left in the crosshairs. That shift suggests a darker interpretation of the past's unresolved horrors creeping into the present. Hawks anchored his story in 1950s anxieties about nuclear power, but he still kept Campbell's central fear, an alien among us. That lingering sense of dread influenced not just Carpenter's film, but also countless other sci-fi horrors. The Thing from Another World proved you don't need state-of-the-art effects to terrify viewers. Sometimes it's all about claustrophobia, paranoia, and the chilling possibility of an unseen threat. Decades later, these two versions of The Thing show how a movie can bridge generations, with each iteration tapping into new fears while respecting what came before. Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954. Creature from the Black Lagoon drops a team of scientists deep in the Amazon, where they hope to explore a bizarre fossil discovery, a claw from a prehistoric amphibian-like creature. Dr. Carl Meyer recruits marine specialist Dr. David Reed, David's girlfriend Kay Lawrence, and their boss Mark Adams to help confirm the find. Unluckily for them, that fossilized limb isn't the only relic lurking in the murky waters. A living gill man roams this lagoon, and when the crew sets up camp, it attacks Maya's workers and grows fascinated with Kay. After a few near captures and chaotic escapes, the beast makes it clear he doesn't plan to let these newcomers leave in one piece. Things really go downhill when Mark insists on killing the creature, while David prefers a more careful approach. By the film's climax, the gill man kidnaps Kay and drags her to his secret lair, forcing the team into a final deadly confrontation. In the end, the mortally wounded gill man sinks into the lagoon, leaving viewers with an eerie finish. Released in 1954, Creature from the Black Lagoon had a massive cultural impact. Universal Pictures promoted it heavily, even sending the costumed Gillman to appear on the Colgate Comedy Hour with Abbott and Costello before the film's official debut. Over time, the monster's distinct look popped up in countless homages, including the 1987 flick The Monster Squad, where a redesigned Gillman joined classic villains like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. That redesign came from effects legend Stan Winston, and it marked the first major costume role for Tom Woodruff Jr., who later worked on the Alien franchise. In 2017, Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water took clear inspiration from del Toro's childhood fascination with the Gillman. Though many have tried, nobody's released a successful remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon yet. Directors come and go, but the project stays stuck in development limbo. Recently, horror maestro James Wan seems poised to finally bring the creature back to the big screen. Until that happens, this 1950s classic remains an unforgettable slice of Universal monster. It Came from Outer Space, 1953. It Came from Outer Space begins with John Putnam, an author and amateur astronomer, spotting a gargantuan meteorite smashing into the Arizona desert. He and his girlfriend, Ellen Fields, hitch a plane ride to the crash site, where John quickly realizes it's no ordinary space rock. Buried beneath the debris sits an alien ship, though nobody else believes him. When a landslide covers the craft again, the town figures John's just spinning tall tales. But then people vanish and return with bizarre robotic behavior, which raises suspicions that something unearthly is afoot. John eventually convinces the local sheriff to gather a posse, yet John wants a peaceful resolution. He heads into a deserted mine, locates the damaged spaceship, and meets the aliens. Large, one-eyed, and tentacled. They have zero intention of conquering Earth. Their plan is to fix the ship and jet off, but they need to hide in human form to finish repairs without scaring the townsfolk. This twist sets It Came from Outer Space apart from many 1950s sci-fi flicks, because these extraterrestrials aren't evil. They just look creepy and keep secrets for their own survival. Director Jack Arnold, who went on to helm The Creature from the Black Lagoon and The Incredible Shrinking Man, cranks up the tension with eerie point-of-view shots from the aliens' perspective. Audiences only catch brief glimpses of these creatures, often wreathed in fog or shot from odd angles, which boosts the mystery factor. Plus, the movie popularized that now classic monster's eye view trick, where the camera lens warps and wobbles to mimic an alien vantage point. Though the storyline sometimes dips into typical 1950s small-town drama, Arnold's style elevates the material. He builds a haunting desert atmosphere around Sandrock, Arizona, and laces the plot with a surprisingly sympathetic view of outsiders. For a modestly budgeted production, It Came from Outer Space still packs a punch, reminding us that aliens in older films weren't always trigger-happy invaders. Sometimes they were just unfortunate travelers on a pit stop, trying not to freak out the locals too much. The Mummy, 1959. Hammer Films' The Mummy transports viewers to 1895 Egypt, where archaeologists John Banning, his father Stephen, and Uncle Joseph Wemple dig for Princess Ananka's tomb. They ignore warnings of a curse from a local named Mehmet Bey and discover the Scroll of Life, a document that accidentally revives Karis, a mummified high priest entombed alive centuries ago for daring to resurrect his beloved Ananka. Stephen ends up catatonic after reading the scroll, and 3 years later in England, Karis seeks revenge on the archaeologists who violated Ananka's tomb. Mehmet Bey, a disciple of Karnak, commands Karis to kill Stephen and Joseph. John soon faces the unkillable mummy himself, firing bullets that do nothing. Meanwhile, John's wife Isabel bears an uncanny resemblance to Princess Ananka, which deepens the supernatural intrigue. This film is a highlight in Hammer's steady rise as a horror powerhouse. After dabbling in sci-fi with the Quatermass experiment, Hammer fully embraced the genre by remaking Universal's classic monsters in bold Technicolor. The Curse of Frankenstein, Horror of Dracula, and The Mummy transformed gloomy English manors into eerie sets at Bray Studios, with a creative team that included director Terence Fisher, screenwriter Jimmy Sangster, and stars Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. These movies built Hammer's iconic legacy: lavish costumes, rich color palettes, and a gothic vibe that balanced old-school horror with fresh energy. Cushing plays John Banning with a mix of skepticism and bravery, while Lee endures an intense makeup routine to become the menacing Karis. Some parts of The Mummy might feel a bit awkward or dated, but its commitment to atmosphere remains top-notch. It's a fusion of the mystical and the creepy, with moments of dry humor. A 55th anniversary edition preserves all that charm in a meticulously restored Blu-ray and DVD release. Extras include commentary from horror historians, a documentary on Hammer's remarkable run, and Terence Fisher's earlier film, Stolen Face, for further context. If you're craving vintage horror with a dash of camp, The Mummy is a proud relic of Hammer's golden era. The Incredible Shrinking Man, 1957. The Incredible Shrinking Man follows Scott Carey, who crosses paths with a mysterious mist while out boating. Soon, he notices his clothes getting too big, and his doctor confirms he's shrinking down on a molecular level, thanks to a freak combo of that weird mist and some earlier pesticide exposure. As he loses height, Scott's life flips upside down. He feels like a sideshow attraction, so he retreats from the world. A temporary pause in his shrinkage offers a glimmer of hope, and he even befriends Clarice, a warm-hearted woman of short stature. But that comfort doesn't last. He shrinks again, leaving her behind. Eventually, Scott ends up living in a dollhouse, where he has a near-fatal run-in with the family cat. He tumbles into the basement, forced to survive on scraps while battling a giant spider that's now the size of a monster to him. The film's climax sees him killing the spider in a nerve-wracking showdown. Even though he continues to shrink, Scott reaches a profound spiritual acceptance, believing he still matters in a vast universe and that a higher power acknowledges his existence. Adapted from Richard Matheson's novel, The Incredible Shrinking Man knocks it out of the park with its visual effects. Director Jack Arnold uses forced perspective, match shots, and back projection to nail the illusion of a man dwindling to insect scale. The sequences with the spider rank among the most suspenseful moments in 1950s sci-fi. However, the movie only scratches the surface of Matheson's deeper themes. The novel's more intense psychological and sexual angles barely show up here, so the emotional punch feels muted. Plus, the film leans heavily on voiceovers to walk us through Scott's mindset, which can weaken the impact of his journey. Still, it's hard to deny The Incredible Shrinking Man's influence on later size shift stories. It's a milestone for special effects in its era, and its existential finale sets it apart from other sci-fi fare. Instead of a simple happy ending or a doom and gloom conclusion, the movie leaves audiences with a philosophical note. No matter how small you become, existence itself carries a purpose that's bigger than size. House of Wax, 1953. In early 1900s New York, Professor Henry Jared runs a wax museum with a refined focus on historical figures who met gruesome fates. His partner, Matthew Burke, grows impatient because Jared refuses to create the sensational, morbid exhibits that other museums use to draw huge crowds. Wealthy critic Sidney Wallace agrees to buy Burke's share in a few months. But Burke won't wait. He torches the museum for the insurance money, douses Jared in kerosene, and leaves him to burn. Burke pockets the payout, but a cloaked, disfigured killer soon strangles him, making it look like suicide. The same figure murders Burke's fiancée, Kathy Gray, but Kathy's roommate, Sue Allen, witnesses part of the attack and flees. The killer steals Kathy's corpse from the morgue. Jared later reappears, scarred and in a wheelchair. He persuades Wallace to invest in a new wax museum, featuring a chamber of horrors that includes a tableau of Burke's suicide. Sue visits the grand opening with her friend Scott and notices the Joan of Arc figure looks eerily like Kathy, complete with a distinct ear piercing. Jared insists he used only newspaper photos as reference. Sue alerts the police, who learn Jared's new assistants, deaf-mute Igor and drunk Leon, aren't exactly squeaky clean. Sue sneaks into the museum after hours, checks under the statue's wig, and finds Kathy's real hair. Jared, who can actually walk, attacks her. She smashes his wax mask, revealing his horribly scarred face and confirming he's the murderer. While Jared prepares to coat Sue in hot wax, the police arrive. They've discovered Jared's sinister secret. He coats corpses in wax to build his figures. A final struggle ends with Jared falling into a vat of molten molten wax, sealing his grim fate. This update of Mystery of the Wax Museum oozes style and suspense, with Vincent Price's suave yet menacing performance at its core. He nails that blend of charm and horror, bringing an elegant flair to the gruesome story of wax-coated corpses. Director Andre de Toth pushes the 3D gimmick to fun extremes. Imagine paddle balls flying toward your face without smothering the plot in cheap thrills. Even a young Charles Bronson, billed as Charles Buczynski, shows up as Jared's silent, intimidating henchman. House on Haunted Hill, 1959. Millionaire Frederick Loren rents a legendary haunted house for his fourth wife Annabelle's party. He invites 5 strangers: test pilot Lance Schroeder, writer Ruth Bridges, psychiatrist Dr. David Trent, office worker Nora Manning, and the house's owner Watson Pritchard, and promises each 10 grand if they last the night. Once midnight hits, the doors lock and there's no escape. The Lorens' marriage is rocky. Frederick suspects Annabelle once tried to poison him for his fortune, and she denies it, blaming his paranoia. Watson believes ghosts roam the house, mentioning how he barely survived a night there himself. A basement tour reveals a vat of acid once used for murder. Lance and Nora stay behind, hoping to unravel the creepy basement's secrets. Lance is knocked unconscious in a sealed room, and Nora encounters a ghostly figure. Annabelle warns Lance that Frederick is up to no good. Later, while the guests gather, each receives a pistol for protection. Nora sees more apparitions and wants to bail, but the caretakers lock up early. Annabelle's body then appears, seemingly hanged. Her suicide looks fishy to Lance and David, who suspect murder. Meanwhile, a terrified Nora claims someone strangled her, then fled. She and Lance eye Frederick as the likely killer. Frederick advises Nora to vanish, hoping the culprit will believe she's dead. That night, a ghostly Annabelle chases Nora into the basement. Dr. Trent proposes splitting up to search for the prowler. Lance gets trapped in a hidden chamber, while Trent sneaks off to meet Annabelle. Their secret affair and staged suicide come to light. They've manipulated Nora to shoot Frederick on sight. She does, apparently killing him. Trent tries to dump Frederick's body in the acid vat, but the lights go out. Annabelle arrives to confirm Frederick's death, only to see a skeleton rise from the vat and force her in. Frederick stands unharmed, revealing blanks in Nora's gun. The guilty lovers are gone, leaving Frederick to await justice. William Castle's carnival approach splashes across every scene, from wacky props to in-your-face theatrics. The Emergo gimmick, where a skeleton floated over moviegoers' heads, turned the film's best scare into a live prank. Though the movie's dialogue can drag, Castle delivers that haunted house ride vibe, complete with acid pits, hidden passages, and shrieking apparitions popping out without warning. Vincent Price plays the perfect spooky MC, beckoning both characters and viewers to brave the night. Sure, the pace isn't lightning fast, but it's still a funhouse of lurid surprises. Horror of Dracula, 1958. In 1888, Jonathan Harker arrives at Count Dracula's castle near Klausenburg, officially to serve as the Count's librarian. Secretly, he's a vampire hunter on a mission to destroy Dracula. A mysterious woman begs Harper for help, revealing she's a vampire, then bites him. Dracula bursts in and pulls her away, leaving Harker wounded and losing precious daylight. When he wakes, Harker realizes the bite has changed the game. He writes a final diary entry and hides the journal outside the castle. He enters the crypt and stakes the vampire woman, watching her rapidly age and die. But before he can finish off Dracula, the Count awakens, traps Harker, and vanishes. Dr. Van Helsing arrives to find Harker gone. An innkeeper gives him the journal, and Van Helsing discovers Harker staked in Dracula's coffin, now undead. Horrified, Van Helsing finishes him off and heads to Karlstadt. There, he breaks the bad news to Harker's fiancée Lucy's family, along with her brother Arthur and Arthur's wife Mina. Lucy bears fang marks on her neck, so Van Helsing covers her room with garlic. She ignores the treatment and dies. 3 nights later, an undead Lucy roams, luring a young girl to the cemetery. Van Helsing stops her with a cross, then stakes her, freeing her soul. Van Helsing and Arthur try to track Dracula's coffin. Meanwhile, Dracula targets Mina, who shows signs of vampirism. A transfusion delays her transformation. Suspicious that Dracula hides nearby, Van Helsing searches the house and finds his coffin in the cellar. Dracula, who has whisked Mina away, escapes. The chase leads to Dracula's final resting place at the castle. Van Helsing pries open the coffin, but finds only Mina. He discovers Dracula has fled. Ultimately, Van Van Helsing confronts Dracula, tears down curtains to let in sunlight, and uses a cross to reduce the Count to dust, saving Mina from eternal damnation. Terence Fisher's direction ignites the Dracula myth with bold color, lush sets, and an undercurrent of raw sexuality that was fresh for the late 50s. Christopher Lee's suave yet terrifying Dracula and Peter Cushing's relentless Van Helsing elevate the script's straightforward premise into riveting gothic drama. Hammer's signature style, crisp visuals, vivid blood, and dramatic lighting help the film stand apart from older black and white versions. Jimmy Sangster's screenplay trims Bram Stoker's plot, but never loses the essence of a dark, seductive menace. Lee's limited lines somehow make him even more chilling, while Cushing's Van Helsing feels dynamic and heroic. The Curse of Frankenstein, 1957. Baron Victor Frankenstein sits in a Swiss prison, awaiting execution for murder. He recounts his life to a visiting priest, explaining how he got there. As a 15-year-old heir, Victor hired Paul Krempe as his tutor. Their scientific partnership grew, and one night they reanimated a dead puppy. Bolstered by this success, Victor proposed creating a perfect human from assorted body parts. Paul initially helped, but grew horrified once Victor's fiancée Elizabeth moved in, raising moral alarms. Undeterred, Victor scavenges human remains, hands and eyes purchased off shady workers, and sets his sights on a brilliant brain. He invites the esteemed Professor Bernstein for a friendly visit, then murders him by shoving him off a banister, making it appear accidental. As Victor extracts the brain, Paul intervenes, damaging it in the struggle. This flaw leads the finished creation to be violent and deranged, lacking the intelligence Victor craved. They lock up the creature, but it escapes and kills a blind man in the woods. Paul shoots it, apparently ending the threat. However, once Paul leaves, Victor retrieves the body and revives it again. Meanwhile, Justine, Victor's secret lover, threatens to expose his experiments unless he marries her. Victor uses the creature to murder her. Elizabeth, unaware of the horror, remains at the estate, trusting him. Ultimately, Paul realizes Victor's madness and tries to stop him, but events spiral. The creature runs amok, culminating in tragedy. Terence Fisher directs with flair and serves gothic elegance with a hint of shock. Peter Cushing plays Victor as a suave sociopath whose curiosity tramples morality, while Christopher Lee brings a tragic presence to the mute monster. The production's vivid color palette and atmospheric sets sharpen each gruesome scene, far more intense than earlier black and white Frankenstein adaptations. Cushing's magnetic performance grounds the film, making Victor's scientific zeal both fascinating and horrifying. The script might not terrify modern audiences, but it introduced Hammer's potent mix of gore, drama, and style. Plan 9 from Outer Space, 1957. We start with mourners at the grave of an old man, whose wife was buried just days earlier. A plane flies overhead, and pilots Jeff Trent and Danny glimpse a blinding light and hear a deafening noise. In the nearby cemetery, 2 gravediggers die at the hands of the old man's reanimated wife, now a ghoul. Tragically, the old man is then hit by a car and perishes, his funeral soon unveiling more bodies. Inspector Daniel Clay investigates the cemetery alone and meets the same fate, attacked by the undead couple. Meanwhile, Jeff tells his wife Paula about the flying saucer, but he's sworn to secrecy by the army. A new saucer lands, flattening everything to the ground with a powerful shockwave. As sightings spread, the military openly fires on the saucers, while the government scrambles for answers. The aliens, led by Commander Eros, have tried to warn Earth about catastrophic weaponry. They activate Plan 9, resurrecting the dead to grab humanity's attention. Zombified Inspector Clay goes rogue, forcing Eros's hand. Eros and his partner Tana worry Earth's scientists might destroy the universe with advanced bombs. They hatch a scheme to create an undead army. Tensions boil as the local police and Colonel Edwards coordinate with Jeff to uncover the alien base. The undead old man disintegrates back into a skeleton, scaring Officer Kelton silly. Eros kidnaps Paula to lure the humans into a showdown at the saucer. Plan 9 from Outer Space is infamous for its cardboard sets, wobbly flying saucers, and wild plot leaps. But its charms lie in Ed Wood's raw passion. He genuinely believed in this loopy alien meets zombie story. Bela Lugosi's brief, posthumous appearance adds a surreal vibe, while a motley cast, including Vampira and Tor Johnson, only amplifies the B-movie chaos. Critics often label it the worst film ever made, yet that label overlooks its odd sincerity. Wood's unpolished script and shoestring effects produce moments of head-scratching wonder. There's no question Plan 9 is a mess, but it's a glorious, unbridled mess that's earned its cult following through sheer earnestness and lovable ineptitude. Night of the Demon, 1957. Professor Harrington, terrified of Dr. Julian Carswell's occult powers, begs him to lift a lethal curse. Carswell pretends to agree, then Harrington rushes home and sees a monstrous demon lurking in the trees. He tries escaping in his car, but crashes into power lines and dies. Officials call it an accident, yet Harrington's colleagues suspect supernatural foul play. Dr. John Holden arrives for a conference where Harrington planned to expose Carswell's devil-worshipping cult. Holden scoffs at demon talk, but meets Carswell in the British Museum's reading room. A rare book about runic magic disappears, and Carswell invites Holden to check out his personal copy. At Harrington's funeral, Harrington's niece Joanna hands Holden her uncle's diary, which details Harrington's fear of Carswell's runes. But Holden still doubts it all. Joanna and Holden visit Carswell's mansion during a children's Halloween party. A sudden storm erupts, which Carswell claims he conjured. He warns Holden he has 3 days left to live. Later, Holden realizes Carswell slipped a runic parchment into his belongings, just like he did to Harrington. That night, a fierce wind tries blowing the parchment into the fire. Holden recovers it, but grows uneasy. Hoping for answers, Holden visits Rand Hobart, a man locked in a catatonic state tied to Carswell's cult. Under hypnosis, Hobart reveals the cursed parchment must be passed back to its original giver, or the victim perishes. Hobart flings himself from a window rather than receive the cursed ruins again. Holden sneaks into Carswell's home to find the key to break the spell, but sees visions of a snarling cat beast. Night of the Demon mesmerizes with its creepy atmosphere, anchored by Dana Andrews' skeptical Holden and Niall McGuinness's unsettling Carswell. The film's real star is its parade of memorable side characters, from Carswell's mother to the seance medium, each adding weight to the occult threat. Director Jacques Tourneur crafts standout scenes. That library encounter, the bizarre Halloween storm, and the skin-crawling trek through Carswell's mansion and woods. Even the train station finale feels fresh with the hellish demon reveal. Though the monster's visibility was controversial, it still serves up a jarring climax. The Night of the Hunter, 1955. During the Great Depression, preacher Harry Powell roams West Virginia, leaving a trail of dead widows in his wake. Arrested for car theft, he ends up sharing a cell with Ben Harper, who robbed a bank for $10,000 and killed 2 men. Before Ben's execution, he never reveals where he hid the cash, frustrating Powell. Once free, Powell travels to Ben's hometown and woos his widow Willa. The townsfolk, smitten by Powell's religious persona, see him as a godsend. But Ben's son John senses danger. Willa, desperate for spiritual redemption, marries Powell. He refuses to consummate the union, claiming holy motives, but soon threatens John and his sister Pearl to reveal the hidden money's location. After Willa overhears him pushing Pearl, she realizes his evil. Powell murders Willa, sinks her body in the river, and pretends she ran off. John and Pearl flee by boat when Powell chases them for the money, which is stuffed in Pearl's doll. They find shelter with Rachel Cooper, a stern but kind-hearted woman who looks after stray kids. Powell eventually tracks them down, charming local folks along the way. Rachel doesn't buy his preacher act and wards him off with a shotgun. At night, Powell returns, but Rachel wounds him. Police arrive and arrest him for Willa's murder. John, overwhelmed by the memory of his father's arrest, breaks down and smashes Pearl's doll, spilling the stolen money. The local townspeople form a lynch mob, but the authorities spirit Powell away before they can hang him themselves. John and Pearl finally find a stable home with Rachel, celebrating a Christmas free from the darkness of Powell's lies. The Night of the Hunter is pure cinematic poetry, part fairy tale, part nightmare. Charles Laughton's only directorial effort brims with tense atmosphere, offbeat humor, and gorgeously surreal images. Robert Mitchum's turn as the sinister preacher Powell is iconic. He swings between smooth-talking charmer and genuine monster, especially when he belts out hymns as he stalks children downriver. The supporting cast shines too, from Lillian Gish's protective Rachel Cooper to a gallery of small-town oddballs. Expressionistic visuals, dreamlike underwater shots, and an unsettling score by Walter Schumann round out the film's hypnotic aura.